What's up, everybody? It's Saint Anani, coming to you live from my parents' basement. Just kidding. I'm on vacation. Wanted to do a tight 10 for you guys. It's been a couple of days. Going to provide some insights from the past couple of days. Let's get into it. All right. Where we left off, there's been mixed reports on whether Fernando Mendoza could actually be the quarterback one to start the year. In my opinion, I still think they're going to make Kirk Cousins be the quarterback for at least a few weeks, even if Fernando Mendoza performs well, just because they seem to be trying to set the table to not push him into a role too soon. They want to get their offensive line gelled. They want to have all the players understanding the playbook and let that all play out. And then eventually they can start slipping Mendoza in. And you never know, if Cousins does well, they might give him a longer leash too. And then there's also been Malik Benson hype, which in a future post, I talked about how he's making the 53-man roster, most likely to be a punt returner, kick returner type of player. But, he's going to be working in the second team with Fernando Mendoza. You never know if that carries through to when Mendoza takes over. Been listening to pods lately, specifically that insiders are putting together, but in this podcast about the Chiefs running back situation, there was speculation that Amari DeMercado is the Chiefs' third down back, and that Emmett Johnson may not do much to start the season. And then I actually had one of the Arrowhead addicts comment on this and say, yeah, there's no way that Andy Reid's going to trust a rookie to be in pass pro. It's going to be Amari DeMercado, most likely, which is great to hear. That doesn't mean that Emmett Johnson won't have a role or won't have a role eventually. It sounds like Emmett Johnson could have a role if, Kenneth Walker, who has gotten hurt a lot with ankle injuries in the past, could eventually come on and be that RB2 in a situation where Kenneth Walker gets injured. And the person that actually did this podcast mentioned that there was 150 snaps that he thought Emmett Johnson would probably have, and most of those coming later in the season. So still, if you're doing a redraft league, you could see somebody just dropping him at some point. But for best ball, you're kind of thinking end of season. That's kind of where I see things playing out for him. Yeah, this is the Arrowhead addict comment that came in where it said DeMercado is the third down guy. The Jaguars beat reporters were all kind of on a podcast together, and they were discussing who comes off the field when Travis Hunter gets on the field for offense. One guy said Brian Thomas. Another one said it's situational based on down and distance and what's needed. They pretty much just said there's probably not going to be a place to put Travis Hunter because he's not going to practice too much on offense, other than the slot where he feels comfortable. So, another person said that because of that it would be Parker Washington that would come off the field because he's the slot receiver. I don't think anyone actually knows the answer, and so they're just all kind of guessing. But they all kind of agreed that Jacoby Myers is not coming off the field and that he's just a really reliable player when catching the ball and doing what he's supposed to do. So that was notable to me. I keep reading so many things about Parker Washington being next in line for a contract extension, and people kind of baselining around this Jaden Reed contract, somewhere around the Jaden Reed and Christian Watson contract. So I'm seeing $16 to $23 million being the range. And that's a pretty significant investment. I think it'll probably, based on what I've read more lately, I think that it'll be less than Jacoby Myers contract, which came in at 20 mil in average annual value, but we'll see where it ends up landing. People are commenting about this podcast that I was listening to, but it's just funny because, when you're looking at the transcripts, you see things like Shulier Bell instead of Skylar Bell, and it's just funny to me. But I was listening to this Bills podcast, and they were talking about Skylar Bell, and they were talking about how there's a legit shot that he gets playing time. So he needs to be healthy. He obviously had a couple of really nice days in the springtime, but he ended up having a small injury, which, for rookies, you just don't want to see people leaving the field. But he could factor into the wide receiver 3 role as time goes on, depending on how Keon Coleman and Josh Palmer look. Josh Palmer continually gets hurt. He's healthy. He came back to practice. Keon Coleman is kind of a wild card. He's going to make the roster, but it's like one of those things where they had him inactive last year in a situation where they were more dire at wide receiver. And so I just don't see Keon Coleman unless he makes like dramatic improvements factoring in for the Bills. Reading that Bills may use James Cook more in the pass game and use Ray Davis and Ty Johnson to take away a couple more rushes from him. Those rushes aren't really that valuable anyway, especially if they're going to use Cook at the goal line and then they start giving Cook some pass down work. This would actually probably be a favorable trade-off if I were to think through it. There was a Breer video or article, and he kind of talked about how Tua is going to probably win the job. The Bears want Caleb Williams to make easy plays. We keep reading about this, like ball placement, not doing things out of structure, etc. It's going to take time for him, but I do actually think that he'll do better in most of those regards this year. Daniel Jones is probably going to be fine for week 1. Patrick Mahomes is hoping to be cleared for 11 work at the start of camp. So that means that he would probably be cleared for week 1 as well. Alvin Kamara, the way that everything was written in the paragraph makes it seem like he's staying on the Saints. I continue to like double and triple down on this, but I think he will be on the Saints. It'll just be at a reduced contract number. Mickey Loomis, they kind of take pride in keeping their guys around. They did it with Taysom Hill. They did it with Cam Jordan just recently. So I think that they're going to do whatever they can to make sure that he's like with the team, but just at a better cost for them for this season. Titans updates. They mentioned Alec Imanor and not Calvin Ridley and Jameer DK. And the offense is intriguing with rookie Carnell Tate arriving, Wan'Dale Robinson coming with OC Brian Dable from New York, and Alec Imanor coming off a big spring, and Cam Ward back for his second year. I just think that that's notable because everything I read is that Imanor fits like the X role that they want him to play, which is weird because then you kind of think like, okay, well, what's Carnell Tate's role? Shouldn't he be the X receiver? I could see them wanting like some diversity with Carnell Tate being able to get some of the Z work, also the X work, and that's where you kind of split between Imanor and maybe some other receiver like DK or Ridley. But I do think that there's a situation that's live where like Ridley just doesn't even play very much or might even get cut. And I've said as much in previous posts because there's been some posts from Titans insiders that have talked about that. But I think that's pretty interesting. And then he also said, I'd also say adding Brandon Ayuk if he has his head on straight would help. And that's talking about Brandon Ayuk and the Commanders. It still seems like there's smoke there and that it'll just end up happening as long as Ayuk takes the steps to actually get reinstated and actually be a real NFL player. I thought this was interesting. There was an article at ESPN that was talking about all the different rookies, and this article talked about how Mekhi Lemon jumped in with the starters and was mainly featured in the slot. Again, I keep seeing slot. What does that mean for 2 tight end sets? We know that Sean Mannion was with Green Bay. Green Bay ran a lot of 2 tight end sets. I do think that like they'll work him into the 2 tight end sets, the 2 wide receiver sets, kind of thinking about it synonymously a little bit. But I don't think it's like every single time. Like Devonta Smith will always be on the field, most likely. Then it's just a matter of splitting those 2 wide receiver sets between Wicks and Mekhi Lemon. And I do think it will be kind of a split there. And it might actually lean towards Dontavian Wicks. So this is the rest of the posts that happened from the ESPN first round rookie update. Raiders aren't going to rush Fernando Mendoza, but he's got impressive leadership skills, work ethic. He needs to work on his footwork and playing under center. Jeremiah Love is a stud. We knew that. Nobody needs confirmation there. Teammates are saying that Carnell Tate looks polished. He stood out at OTAs. We knew that also. Jordan Tyson was limited in practice. Ty Simpson is coachable. It's not what you want to hear when you're trying to be like a young up and coming first round quarterback. Kenyon Sadiq should be ready for training camp. That's huge because he missed all of mini camp and OTAs with a hernia surgery. We'll see how limited he is and how long it takes for him to get up to speed, especially with Mason Taylor being like an adequate tight end. It might take like a couple of weeks before they really push the Kenyon Sadiq button, but we'll see how that all transpires in training camp. I already talked about Mekhi Lemon. Casey Concepcion, they talked about his role a little bit and how he's doing like deep plays, screens, run plays. So it's kind of like gadgety work that they're talking about him in. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Like getting design work is great. It'll boost your targets per route run. It gives you opportunities to score touchdowns, stuff like that. But it's just like, I don't know. I want to hear him being like a full receiver. So we'll see. I know there's another post that kind of talked about him doing the Zay Flowers stuff. We'll see where that actually ends up going. Omar Cooper solidified in 3 wide receiver sets and was impressive in the spring. We knew that. He would probably be a top 3 receiver because of draft capital, but it's good to hear the confirmation. Jadarian Price should be in a timeshare with George Helani, Emmanuel Wilson, and Zach Charbonnet when he's back. And I am personally believing that every single time that I see it now. I think that he'll have the opportunity to get more of a lion's share, but I do think that just based off of research that they do want to share. They do want a little bit of a split, regardless of how talented one guy is. I think they want to give that split. And so it may limit his full potential upside. And, he hasn't shown that he's a pass down back in his previous history. So we'll see. This just talks about it more, but we don't have to get into more details there. It sounds like Zach Charbonnet is going to hit his initial timeline. I think originally people were saying there were some reports earlier in the offseason that were talking about him being back by like October or even September. And I think that's just kind of unrealistic, but an early November timeline seems realistic. And obviously let's just say it would take 3 weeks to ramp up from there, right? We're still talking about him being a factor in the fantasy playoffs. So that's the other kind of like not bull case, the bear case for Jadarian Price when we're thinking about all that. This one's fun. I was doing some research on like explosive plays for running backs, and we always talk about like, hey, these running backs are really good in certain situations and different things like that. A lot of what we see from explosive plays all come based off of yards before contact. Like the kind of like line here is saying like once you get to 6 yards plus of yards before contact, that's when you start seeing guys like explode and have big plays. So when I did this analysis, it kind of showed that roughly like 70% of that yards before contact is O-line and scheme. And someone else pointed out like quarterback, because if you have a Lamar, it's probably going to open up some bigger holes too. But yeah, that's kind of what it is. There's some players that stand out, which we'll get to in a later post, but for the most part, it's just you need a good O-line. So my takeaway there is like O-line and scheme is going to design big plays for you. That's a really strong thing for Omari and Hampton, which we'll talk about later. Speaking of which, I will never stop tweeting Omari and Hampton propaganda. There was this video that was going around about Xavier Worthy, and he looks kind of not great in this video. Obviously, there's like tall grass. People were not sure if it's actually him. I think there's been confirmation that it is actually him. But I was kind of like comparing this, and maybe he's going half speed and just like working on really technical things. But like that versus what I see out of Stephon Diggs, and this being like what I think is definitely a better receiver than Xavier Worthy, even at this point in his career, is just night and day. If you hadn't already checked it out, but I was on the Dwayne McFarland's like Fantasy Life podcast. You guys should check it out. I talked about every single team with him, and we kind of went over like who we're targeting and different things like that as well. Really cool opportunity. Matt Collar, who covers the Minnesota Vikings, does a podcast. He has his own like Substack, all sorts of stuff. He was doing like projections for the Vikings, which I found really interesting. I wouldn't like take the numbers to heart, but I would take like the signals to heart. So he said that he thinks that Jordan Mason will win the RB1 role and that he breaks 1,000 yards. Man, this is tough. Aaron Jones looked bad last year, and so did Jordan Mason, but I think Aaron Jones looked worse. And when you see it, things just fall off at running back, sometimes the wheels just fall off like really hard. And so maybe that's a signal for Damon Claiborne, but being a late round pick, like you just can't really project that he's going to have a significant role. So yeah, I kind of could see Jordan Mason having a bigger season, maybe not 1,000 yards, but like an 800-yard rushing season. Jordan Addison, he said roughly 800 yards, and his prop line is 675 and a half, which I think would surprise people because of what his draft cap, what his ADP is right now. I think that his role is just really tough. He's a deep threat, and I think adding Jawan Jennings, who really operates in that short to intermediate area of the field, just makes it even more tough for him to have like more of a short to intermediate route tree. So I think that he's I've taken him a lot, but I do think that he's not like the greatest pick, just because I see like very limited upside for him in this offense. Also, Kyler doesn't throw it deep very often, and he's not very good at throwing deep. So that's another challenge for him. He had Jawan Jennings with 500 yards and splitting with Ty Felton. I disagree there, but it's good, interesting to hear. Then he had TJ Hawkinson having a bounce back season. I pointed out that Miami wants to be Green Bay South, and they just took a bunch of like third, fifth round receivers, and that they've done like the Packers used to do stuff like that too, where they took Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, Dubose, Christian Watson, Dubs, Samari Toure. Like there's just different like situations that these teams operate in, and it seems like someone's asking if I went over Ayuk's new video. I haven't actually. I did somewhat see it, but it was like corner of the eye, one of those things like that. I was talking to somebody else on the phone for a while. More confirmation that the Giants will deploy 12 personnel often this season. So that's going to be a likely and Theo Johnson pairing. I talked about this. I actually had another tweet on top of this that talked about like what that means. But under Greg Roman, who is the offensive assistant for John Harbaugh for the Giants, the Ravens had 59.8% of their pass plays came with two tight end sets, which is like close to the theoretical max. The theoretical max is here at 69%, which would be really high. I think they could live in this world where it would be like 50 to 59%. So that would mean that Theo Johnson would get like 50% routes, and Isaiah Likely could get to 70 or 80%, which would be huge for him, because that's the one thing that I'm worried about is for some reason they would just decide, he doesn't get like the full allotment of routes. And we know that tight end, a lot of times tight end scoring just comes down to like, are you a top 2 target runner on your team? And do you run like, if you run over 70% of the routes, you're in a unique category. I think that that's likely. Joe Goodberry had a nice little thing where he talked about kind of the offensive changes for the Bengals that we might see. He's talked about utilizing more 12 personnel, again, talking about Eric All being like critical to unlocking the versatility of going under center, using 12 personnel and doing play action. It sounds like they're investing a lot in Eric All being on the field. I don't see that being like a full-time role. Like I think 2 years ago when he was on the field, it was like a 30% snap share. And I could kind of see it being that exact same thing where they still rotate Drew Sample and Mike Gesicki, just depending on situations. Someone called me a superhero. That was awesome. I appreciate it. doing this for everybody. I'm just spending my own time researching and doing articles and then doing analytics on the side too. Not much momentum on CJ Stroud contract. They kind of are thinking about it in a prove it year. They're comparing the situation to Trevor Lawrence and think he will play out the 4th year of his deal. I think that's probably the right move. Sam Monson and Will Parkinson had a podcast where they talked about Omar Cooper. They were just kind of saying like he's not just a slot only player. They can move him and Garrett Wilson around while AD Mitchell stays on the outside, taking that press man role. So it's just reassuring to hear like that he could potentially be in like 2 wide receiver sets, because Garrett Wilson could play the AD Mitchell role too if they did 2 wide receiver sets. Like he can be the deep threat. He could take on the press coverage. So they can rotate that and then also have Omar Cooper in as the second wide receiver. But then they can also do AD Mitchell's in, and then Garrett Wilson is the second wide receiver, being in that more like Z, diverse role. Javonte Williams is planning to continue his rehab/training plan from last season to stay healthy. Obviously, we know that he was very healthy last year. Very, very big for him to be in that situation. It's good to see that he's keeping his training up. This was pretty big, but I keep seeing things from the Texans just talking about David Montgomery, and like saying that he, is going to contribute in all facets of the game, that he, they wanted to improve goal line. So they brought in David Montgomery. So he's going to be the goal line back, and that he's a vocal leader, that he can contribute in the pass game, that he's a 3-down back. Like we've heard all of these different quotes throughout the offseason. I think it's just him stepping into a Joe Mixon role, which is a very, very bullish Bellcow role. Isaac Tesla was mentioned by Tim Twentyman as the Lions' breakout player to watch. He's a wide receiver 3 for them, pretty much guaranteed. Likely won't rotate out very often, and has built up significant chemistry with Jared Goff. The Commanders were interested in bringing in Brandon Ayuk on a 1-year incentive-heavy deal, and now it's a little bit more uncertain given the recent social media posts. I still think it's going to end up happening, so I would not worry that much about that. Some caution here on Jonathan Brooks from The Athletic, but a reminder that the team is still evaluating him, right? So he hasn't proven that he can like get past all the hurdles, go full speed, that he can take on hits in a game or anything like that. So there's still like some hold up on him. Now, if he is healthy at the start of the season, if he gets through week 1 and 2 and like passes all these checkpoints, I can see him taking over that like dominant role and taking on the pass down role for the Panthers. But it still seems like there's a little bit of like slow play that we should be thinking about with him, because they're not going to just give him 20 carries in the first week. So I keep reading things about Shedeur, that I think that he's going to end up being the quarterback, maybe not week 1, but by the end of the season. There's another post that came out today that kind of said as much as well. So just something to note. Josh Jacobs, no update on his legal situation. It says he's still under investigation by the Brown County District Attorney's Office. I think that's really important, knowing that something could still happen. Tyquan Thornton continually is mentioned as like one of the top 3 wideouts for the Chiefs. So it's just important to know like that's a really strong late round best ball pick. Probably not a redraft pick, but a guy who is basically playing in that deep threat, MVS, Justin Watson, like clear out type of role, but actually better at it than those guys were. Supporting the notion that Raiders are unlikely to sign a veteran free agent wide receiver. The Raiders brass believes with more opportunities, the production of Naylor, Trey Tucker, Jack Besh, and Dante Thornton will pick up. And this has been consistent. Like I keep hearing that they don't want to add a veteran. So I think that the Raiders receiver room is pretty much set in stone, which actually is good for Malik Benson if he is a guy, if he's a dude. No update on Malik Neighbors. Impossible to know. I've read coin flip. Like there's just nothing out there. We don't know yet. It sounds like year 2 in Nick Haley's offense for CJ Stroud is leading to stronger grasp of the offense, but it's allowing him to focus on more strategic items. So the quote was, during OTAs and minicamp, the offense's pre-snap operation was more in sync. Fourth-year quarterback had the offense organized consistently, and there weren't many hiccups with pre-snap motions. It's good to just like not have to think about all of that. Trevor Lawrence talked about it himself this offseason too, where it's like I'm coming in and stepping into my own, and I like the processing stuff is done. Now I just need to play. I think that's important. I think with an improved offensive line, another year of weapons growing, additional personnel, I actually think that Stroud could take a nice step forward this year. On Casey Concepcion, this is how I wanted to hear Casey Concepcion's being used, but I think we should still take it with a grain of salt. So because there's been conflicting reports. Because Concepcion's potential in the offense aligns with what Browns coach Todd Monken did with former first-round pick Zay Flowers when Monken was the Ravens offensive coordinator. That means moving Concepcion around the formation, getting him matched up on a safety or linebacker so he can utilize his speed. Yes, we want him to be used in the Zay Flowers role because we think that he could be better than Zay Flowers at the Zay Flowers role. Maybe not from a fantasy production in year 1, but we think he's a really good player. There was a mailbag for the Packers.com, and the person was asking about Marshawn Lloyd. And basically the writer was like, Marshawn Lloyd is a present that is yet to be opened. So basically saying like he has to prove it, needs to be healthy. The team is, hopes that it all happens, but they have contingencies if not. I've also been doing best ball streams. If you guys are interested in that, you can check them out on the same page. I thought this was an interesting conversation too. So Albert Breer and Connor Orr were talking about like coaches are copying the McVay and Shanahan like trees, plays basically, and their whole thing was like you can copy the plays, but you don't know the why behind it. You don't have the play caller. There's sequencing that goes on. Like there's so many reasons why you would do something, and that you can't just copy. You got to have your own like twist. Because then that means that you've mastered it. And I thought that was really interesting. Then they were also talking about the rise of hybrid players like Kyle Hamilton and Nick Emanwari, and how those guys are making like defense a little, like contest the offense a little bit more. And I completely agree that I think that those guys make defenses more dynamic, and I'm hoping that Caleb Downs can bring the same thing to the Cowboys this year. I'm a little worried about Josh Jacobs' right leg injuries. He's had quite a few of those pile up. Not exactly the same injuries over time, but just something that I thought, we should be cognizant of. I wrote an article about deep threats. I'm not going to talk about it here, but the TLDR is that deep threats are worse than short route kings. You should read the article. That was probably one of my best posts that I've had. I did a huge analytical breakdown. I was listening to this ETR pod where they were talking about projections, and they talked about who the wide receiver 3 is going to be, and they think that it'll be Pat Bryant. And I think that has a tremendous impact on what ends up happening with Courtland Sutton, because Sutton's kind of diverse in that he can be like the intermediate guy or he can be the deep guy. And they've kind of used him in like a mix and match role based off of the personnel that's on the field. My concern is that if they have Pat Bryant on the field more, Pat Bryant has shown that he's more of a short to intermediate guy. So that pushes Courtland Sutton deeper. And I don't really like that for Courtland Sutton. It goes back to what I wrote in my article that you guys should check out, but that being a deeper threat isn't a positive thing. So if Pat Bryant's playing more, that's probably going to be poorer for Courtland Sutton. But if it's Troy Franklin or Marvin Mims, those are going to be the deep threats. That means that Sutton can play that like intermediate role a bit more. I do think Waddle will be the short and intermediate guy because these route trees usually stay with players over time, even when they switch teams. So a lot of stuff that I posted about my article. just trying to get the information out there. Chiefs built the offense around structure, accountability, and more run game. KC wants a real run game for the first time in years. Made a point to get Kenneth Walker. I think Kenneth Walker should destroy if he's healthy, and their breakout pick was Xavier Worthy. I don't have as high hopes for Xavier Worthy, but if you're a worthy guy, go for it. I keep seeing, in podcasts and in articles that the Colts are potentially interested in signing a veteran free agent wide receiver. The names that keep popping up are Keenan Allen and Deebo Samuel. Keenan Allen has a relationship with Shane Steichen from the Chargers days, so that kind of makes some sense. Don't be worried about Jeremiah Love's workload. He's going to be a workhorse. Kyle Pitts talked about his ebbs and flows of his career, citing injuries and QB changes, said that he wants to prove he's the guy and he believes he's capable of being a guy. And I keep seeing that they want to use 12 personnel quite a bit with Charlie Warner and Jahan Dotson on the field, two guys that don't really earn many targets, which means that this is going to consolidate around London, Pitts, and Bijan pretty much. I can see all three of those guys having a targets per route run definitely above 20%. So it's just about how high it can actually get. And I think London might actually end up getting super high, but we'll see. Xavier Thomas has to earn Ben Johnson's trust. Olamide Zaccheaus blocked Burden for a lot of the season. It may take some time, but I think that they'll have some design plays for Xavier Thomas. Khalif Raymond and Jade Walker have familiarity, so that's going to hold him back a little bit. But potentially by end of season, you'll see some Xavier Thomas. Keep seeing Parker Washington as the next guy to get his extension. And I have posted like the 4 sources that I've seen it from different people. Koziel and Jamari Taylor making the roster for the Jags. I think we knew that Koziel will make the roster, but it's good to have more confirmation. Cade Klubnik, ideally, he doesn't have to play in any games this year, so the Jets can focus on his development. We'll see. Maybe end of season, but it would be great if Geno could play the whole season for all of the Jets guys. Eagles Nuggets from this Athletic article, writer basically said like, hey, we're just going to say like roughly like 3,600 pass yards come out of Jalen Hurts, which I think he had like 3,800 once, and then I think he had or 3,800 twice, and then he had 3,200 or so last year. So I think 3,600 is probably fair, especially getting rid of AJ Brown. With 1,200 going to Devonta, that would be a really good season, and would put him in like a second round pick consideration situation there where he pays off at that. Dallas Goedert at 700, Mekhi Lemon at 650, Dontavian Wicks at 500, and Saquon at 350. So notably leaving out Hollywood Brown from that equation, but he'll kind of, potentially just fill in some of that gap from 3,600 to this 2,200 or so that they have. He's more bullish on Wicks than the person who asked the question. He thinks that it's like a Wicks, Mekhi Lemon, like, 2 wide receiver set like mix. And then on Jaden Blue, the drumbeat just keeps getting louder. Basically, Javante's definitely the clear running back 1, and then Blue is in line to have a complimentary piece as long as he keeps checking boxes. So we'll see kind of how that goes. I did contribute to this brain trust article thing that we had and kind of cited one player that I think is the best target in best ball drafts. I'll let you guys click on that and see who I actually said is the best pick right now. But I did mention it on the Dwayne McFarland podcast that I did too. There's a question in The Athletic about the chances that Adam Randall wins the RB2 job, and I think Jeff Zrebeck just kind of did a good job of skating the answer, but he basically said that Justice Hill has the Justice Hill role where he's the RB2, he's better out of the backfield, blitz pickup, stuff like that. Didn't sound like it's a guarantee that he would be like the Derrick Henry backup if Derrick Henry got injured. So I do think Adam Randall has a chance to win that. He's still in competition with Rasheen Ali, but being handpicked by the owner, I think gives you a little bit of a leg up there. Jahan Dotson is the favorite to be the Falcons' early season wide receiver 2. But I expect Zach Branch to eventually factor in there. They're going to do gadget plays for him. They're going to design screens, etc., to him. Eventually, I think that he could take on that role, or at least be like the slot in 12 personnel, which is, again, going back to Pitts, London, and Bijan eating in those sets. The Athletic talked about the running back room for the Raiders and basically said that Gene T will have an elevated role in year 2, though he basically had a big role in year 1. They also talked about Mike Washington and Dylan Laube splitting the spelling role for Ashton Dean T, which is interesting because they spent a nice pick on Mike Washington, and we all kind of just assume he's the handcuff, but it sounds like that might not necessarily 100% be the case. The Raiders wide receiver room feels pretty clear that Trey Tucker and Jalen Naylor are wide receiver 1 and 2, with Jack Besh and Dante Thornton rotating at wide receiver 3 and 11 personnel. The way that I'd see it is Besh is more of like that slot receiver, with Dante Thornton playing like the X outside, which means that Jalen Naylor and Trey Tucker could rotate around, and it just depends on which one of those two guys are in which position they end up playing. And then it also has Malik Benson making the team and competing at wide receiver later in the season, but he's going to be the return man. There's a question and answer about Jalen Waddle and Courtland Sutton and whether they can both get 1,000 yards. And it sounds like Courtland Sutton had a quote that he basically said like he's willing to take a back seat if that's what's going to be best for the team. And just my opinion, like given the talent difference between the two players, what the Broncos gave up, I can see Sutton's route share decrease a little bit year over year, so that they can rotate him a little bit more and preserve him as he continues to get older. I thought this was a weird like Q&A thing, but I think it was like a positive note for RJ Harvey. The question was about like who's a surprise cut, and then the answer was not RJ Harvey being cut, but that he's under the radar. People are assuming that he's going to get squeezed on touches because of Jonah Coleman, but the team is heavily invested in him, and they don't necessarily see that happening. So we'll see how it works out. I don't see it bullish, but I don't see it like bearish either. I think it's just kind of like, all right, he's going to play. Ladd McConkey came in as the 7th most important Chargers player and the highest wide receiver. Pretty much exactly what you wanted to hear, them calling him the number 1 option, be used on the move with pre-snap motion. And they compared him to Tyreek and Waddle. I don't think he's a Tyreek talent, but I could see him being just as good as Waddle. But if, Tyreek wasn't there, basically. I thought it was also notable that Charlie Kolar was mentioned in the last session where they did like the player 20 through or 10 through 20, and Kolar was 14th, and Gadsden did not make the top 20. Quentin Johnson was 15th last time they did this, and they didn't list Trey Harris in the top 20 either. So that was interesting to me. And Omarion Hampton was actually higher than any other skill position player that's not a QB, because obviously Justin Herbert was number 1 on that list. But Omarion Hampton being higher than Ladd, being 6th most important player from Daniel Popper, I thought was very interesting as well. And there's some writer speak on like the partnership with McDaniel leading to fireworks. And I personally do believe that. We see that through some of the charts that I've posted. But I think it's important that, the beat writers are saying like, hey, this guy's super important to the team. Because a lot of people are assuming like Keaton Mitchell will take a lot of the work. And I think that Keaton Mitchell will have his 5 to 7 touches. But yeah. Giants updates, Scatterbo fine for week 1. He's going to play the same physical style, and Malik Neighbors is a coin flip for the opener. There's a lot on the Rams skill position. The Rams are going to manage Matthew Stafford's back during training camp like they did last year, but there's no reason to panic when he's resting. No major changes for Puka and Devontae Adams. They think Kyron could tap into more as a receiver, and they should transfer more of his rushing touches to Blake Corum. With Corum, they had a quote, "He's found a great feel for the run game, and another step as a receiver and pass protector could pull him closer to a 50-50 split with Williams." I don't know. I think there's just an immense trust with Williams. I think it'll just kind of be how it ended up looking at the end of last season, which was close to 50-50. It was more like 60-40. RB3 between Ronnie Rivers and Jarquez Hunter will come down to special teams. Terrence Ferguson was mentioned as the de facto wide receiver 3 right now as well. Colby Parkinson, he'll continue to be a focal point on third downs and red zone in this 3 tight end offense. Max Clare basically sounds like a redshirt season for him. Obviously, there could be injuries, but that's what it sounds like right now. Tyler Higbee, still trusted by Matt Stafford as a safety valve. He was a healthy scratch in the playoffs, and they speculate that it might be because he was injured at the end of the season last year. And then they don't see there's not much on the wide receiver 3 plus for the Rams right now. Okay, this was an interesting post that I had too. So I was trying to chart out what is something valuable for people to understand in terms of explosive runs. Because I talked about how explosive runs are big for fantasy, and that we reviewed one of the charts earlier. And I think there's this over and under expected that we can kind of learn from. You can see that Omarion Hampton was actually already above the explosive over expected number. And then you see Devin Achane also above. Some of it is explained by scheme, which I think is good, but then Achane's better than even the scheme itself, which is awesome. So what my takeaway there is that I think Hampton's going to have a really big season with explosive plays. He's a really good athlete. Then I see Kenneth Walker and Charbonnet both be above the line, which I think is also a scheme-related item. So I think that's interesting for Ashton Jeanty. And then the other thing that I kind of pointed out was Ramondre Stevenson above expected. Travion Henderson had better blocking, and he was below expected. And he actually was lower than Ramondre in total explosive run rate. And anyway, those are my takeaways. Explosive runs are 7.4 times more valuable than a regular carry in fantasy. Josh Downs is expected to play significantly more on the outside in addition to the slot from this podcast by Jake Arthur. Alec Pierce is coming back late July to September, and then Keenan Allen and Debo were mentioned again as potential free agent signings. Ashton Doolin is the front runner for wide receiver 3. Nate Tice posted this video of Bashal Tutin catching a nice pass, and what I have read from Liam Cohen is that they don't want to be predictable by personnel, specifically at running back. That's one of the reasons why they moved on from Tank Bigsby, because they didn't believe he could contribute in the pass game as much. And so when I think about it and I just read the tea leaves, it's Tutin's the only one out of him and LaQuint Allen and Chris Rodriguez that can do both run game stuff and receiving game stuff. So still really bullish on Tutin, especially at his current price. There was a report that the Seahawks may do more 21 personnel in addition to their 12 personnel because they have Robbie Oots at fullback. Kind of interesting there. There's another pod that confirmed that Rashid Shaheed is going to see an uptick in usage, that the chemistry is strong with Sam Darnold, and that we will see more short to intermediate routes, which, if you read my article, is very, very big for fantasy. They also mentioned how they think really highly of Torrey Horton, that he plays Rashid Shaheed's whole role. So if Shaheed got injured, Torrey Horton would step in there. And I would personally love it if Horton were to take on more of Cooper Kupp's work too, or if they were able to figure out a way to work him in there. But we'll see what happens. Article today saying that the Texans are unlikely to add a veteran free agent, and that they expect Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel to take big steps forward. Also mentioned that Tank Dell will likely begin the year behind Higgins and Noel because he hasn't played since December 2024. But if he's healthy, you never know. Watch out. thought this was interesting, and one of the reasons why I think that Michael Pittman might be a better pick than DK Metcalf, but that Pittman does all of the short route stuff that I think Rodgers likes to target, which is, these dig routes and short crossers and different things like that. Roman Wilson is still the front runner, quote unquote, for wide receiver 3, but I expect Jeremy Bernard to win out. They keep calling him pro ready, that he has potential to be versatile, all sorts of stuff. So I'm pretty bullish on Jeremy Bernard winning that wide receiver 3 role. Same article was talking about Rico Dowdle and that he could share or emerge as the lead back. I still think it'll be a hot hand split. And then Jalen Warren, they said a little bit about the Kenny Gainwell role, which I think had my ears perked up. Hey, is he going to get all of that short, dump off passes? We'll see. Still 50-50 on Eli Heidenreich making the roster. This is the first time I heard anything about Harold Fannin Jr. Also, like what his injury was specific, like in a notable article, and then the fact that he's going to be back for training camp too. So I'm like less worried about him because he sat out all of OTAs and minicamp, but he's coming back for training camp. Then on Judkins, they said clear lead rusher, and they have big plans for him. I think that he's going to get a ton of work. Shador, they're saying like he has to play this season. They need to finish their evaluation on him before they jump into the draft, which I agree they will do that. Some notes on the Eagles. Dontavian Wicks and Mekhi Lemon will jump right into the mix alongside Devonta. So those are like in your 3 wide receiver set, those are your starters, with Mekhi Lemon being in the slot. Scheme is going to have more under center and motion. We know those 2 things are valuable for fantasy. And, there is some risk. The writer was cautious about like the O-line. There was Landon Dickerson, I think, who it was, that did some stem cells treatment. He considered retirement. So did Lane Johnson. And so there's just, some risk with that O-line in general. But it is a really good O-line when they're healthy. Still some risk and concern about Malik Neighbors. They need him healthy. Not a guarantee to play week 1. He had scar tissue removed, all sorts of stuff. So nobody knows. Again, coin flip there. If you are watching and you do have a podcast or a live stream that you end up doing, if you want me on, I'm open for it. I'm even taking on like smaller people that don't have like a big following yet. I think it's helpful to just kind of contribute everywhere that I can. Commander's notes, they could add another wide receiver during training camp. John Keim mentioned help could come in the form of Brandon Ayuk. I still think that's like pretty much a lock to happen, as long as he doesn't fall off the face of the planet. They're saying that they're going to scheme players open more easily this season. Everybody thinks that they're able to do that. And then Chig is considered a big helper and playmaker. I just keep hearing a lot of stuff about Chig. So I do think he's like their de facto wide receiver 2 kind of in this situation, or second option, until we know more about Ayuk and if Ayuk's even ready to play. I thought this was interesting. So Mike McDaniel was talking about how he wants to turn 5-yard routes into 12-yard plays and so on. And then he talked about how this like footwork shift for Justin Herbert is supposed to cut down on by a millisecond, and how that millisecond enables players to have additional space when they get the ball quicker to do things. And I completely agree. There's you're playing for fractions of a second that help you get a better edge and chance to make a bigger play. So just some insight on him. George Pickens showed up for minicamp and is likely to show up for training camp. Looking forward to proving himself and building off of last season with Dak. I think we know that he's going to be there. We feel good about that. It's good because we've seen receivers in the past like Terry McLaurin sit out and then struggle with injuries, soft tissue things, stuff like that. So good to hear that he's going to be there. All right, that's another edition of the Tight 10. Thank you guys.